This is Test Case Scenario with me, your host, Jason Baum. This podcast is the definitive hub for knowledge and stories in the software testing and development communities. If you're new to the channel, hit the subscribe button and let's dive straight into the episode. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Test Case Scenario. I'm your host, Jason Baum, and with me as always, we've got the one, the only Marcus Merrill, who is in yet another location today. Marcus, I think you have a different background or location almost every single time we talk.
Well, this is our new place, so hopefully this is it for a while.
Fun fact for those listening at home, Marcus and I actually had a call earlier today. He was sitting on the opposite end of that exact same deck. And so now I get the other view. So it's not just Test Case Scenario. It's whenever I talk to Marcus, he is changing locations on me. I think it's purposely done, by the way. It's like, where's Waldo? Where's Marcus? Okay, but I digress. And with us today, joining us, we are very lucky. We get Bobby Dorlus, who's also probably more well-known. You might know him as BobbyD. BobbyD is a seasoned engineer and motivational speaker with over 20 years of experience in technology and engineering, specializing in site reliability engineering and hyperscale distributed infrastructure. His career took a pivotal turn during his 9-year tenure at Twitter, where he played a crucial role in the company's tech and diversity and inclusion initiatives. BobbyD's contributions led to him being recognized as staff engineer, a rare achievement for Black engineers in tech. He is deeply committed to giving back to the community through mentoring, coaching, and educational efforts, particularly with the tech hustle community, aiming to empower the next generation with diverse perspectives and insights. Bobby, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, fellas. I really do appreciate you all giving me this chance to shine just a little bit, but thank you all so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Fun fact, that profile was written by my favorite friend and our fourth panelist, ChatGPT. So shout out.
Big shout outs.
Yeah, big shout out to ChatGPT. Tell your friend in case they haven't heard about it. Bobby, thanks so much for being on today. So what's going on in the world of BobbyD today?
Man, I'm down here in South Florida. It's a little warm. I'm really enjoying the view there. I definitely could do a little bit outside, but I'd probably be sweating down here in South Florida. But I'm doing great. The industry's, on a roller coaster as always, but always looking forward to conversations with bright minds like you all.
Awesome. Today's show, we definitely want to latch on to one topic. I think we're going to end up talking about multiple, as we tend to do, as our listeners know, and hopefully love us for, hopefully don't criticize us too much for. Today, I know we want to get to a topic that's actually been in my mind for the past several weeks. We touched on it, actually, honestly, for the past year. We had a report come out called Developers Behaving Badly back in the fall. And it touched on several different areas, but we basically took, actually how it was formed is kind of fun. We took developer memes from throughout the internet and we were like, what if these are true? What if we polled developers and found out how many developers were pushing straight to production without testing their ChatGPT code? You'd be shocked. You'd be shocked by how high the number is. Or maybe not, I don't know. But a few key figures really stood out to me. And it was 77% of developers had a new task placed on them since last year that they had no prior knowledge of, they weren't doing, it's outside of their scope, but now they're doing it. And I believe it was 60, Marcus, help me with the numbers, but I believe it was 67% of developers said that they have pushed to production without testing.
Yeah, in that ballpark.
Yeah. And I believe, get ready for this if you thought that one was bad, I believe it was 45% used ChatGPT code that they pushed into production without testing. Told you it was going to be high. Is that higher than you would have thought?
For sure. That definitely gives me pause, especially with being a site reliability engineer, keyword site reliability, right? Just mindset wise, what the risk is when you're, blindly pushing stuff to production without test. At
Yeah.
a basic, I'm hoping they included some unit tests or something like that. But nowadays, hey, you want to get code out as quickly as possible. I guess break it fast. I don't know. I don't get it.
Yeah, right. It used to be go fast, break things. I don't think they meant that literally.
It was never SpaceX's when they coined, when I first heard that phrase from them, I guess it was also Facebook. But when SpaceX, you think about SpaceX, it's not your design goal to blow up every single rocket that goes up. You are trying to land a few of them.
But at least a few of them.
Yeah, I know. So I think that number is a little high, Jason. We need to look it up, but I think I think it might be a little bit lower than that, but it's definitely above 25%.
Oh yeah.
It's not 25% of all developers. It's 25% of the 60 something percent, which means it's about 18% ish. 1 out of 5 developers is pushing ChatGPT written code to production without testing it. The survey didn't reflect this, but I hope not only for unit tests, but also that it's behind a feature flag, maybe in a canary build only pushed out to 1% of traffic, something like that. It's terrifying, but we don't know for sure.
Yeah. I mean, we have a lot of opinions, obviously, on this. We've talked about them. But for me, where I've been at, and I actually just, I've been writing this article that's going to come out probably when this comes out, it's already out. And it's called Shift Left is Dead. And I take a pretty harsh take. And do I think Shift Left is dead? No, I don't think Shift Left is dead. Do I think Shift Left ever actually happened? That's a whole other article. That's a whole other article, whole other topic. But we touch on that. I touch on something that we referred to in the survey. It's something we've heard a lot about is the lazy developer. I don't think developers are lazy. Where I think this comes from is the amount of tasks being placed on the developer. And what Shift Left tells us, right, is early in the process, often throughout, moving testing earlier. Great. What have we seen? What is the reality, though, of what has happened? And that is the elimination of QA teams, SDETs, developers testing, unit testing, like you referred to. Is that enough? No. And we know that. And what are we seeing of it? Well, we also have reports, one that's going to be coming out very soon, if not already out when this airs, on experience and that people have with apps. And yeah, the numbers are going to be high. I'm not going to get into them today because technically the report's not out yet. But I have seen it, and I know that quality is going down and efficiency is going down, and people are getting frustrated. And the amount of time that they'll spend with an app that does not work is shortening. I think that it's showing us that perhaps the developers should not be the one testing. I'd love to hear both of your opinions on that. Bobby, why don't you lead us off?
Yeah. So just thinking about it, it's one thing that as a site reliability engineer, I used to teach this to my mentees, is that I've always felt like I was the diplomat for our users, our customers. And one thing that always kept in mind for me is what was the customer's experience? Regardless of what's being developed, feature flags or features that are being, in the pipeline, but what is the experience? And as soon as you affect the customer's experience as an SRE, that's why I'm raising the flag and waving it like, hey, we need to reevaluate either what we're working on, how we're deploying, how we're testing is always one of the top mentioned areas for us to focus on. And this is something that I think a lot of viewers can see, even the development and history of Twitter. I started working at Twitter back in 2013. 2013 through 15, we were just known as the fail well infrastructure, right? There was things were breaking whenever we pushed something. We had some other major components like having a very monolithic application, running on Ruby on Rails, not really taking advantage of microservices and breaking smaller things. But one thing that definitely was noted is the lack of the amount of quality testing that we were doing in that environment. And over the years, you've seen the platform get better, because that was one of our initiatives as SREs to raise the red flag, ensure that management's aware of the lack of these normal practices that you rely on, especially when you're building an infrastructure that the world depends on, and you ultimately see the results, the application gets better, right? Well, I'm not speaking on where it's at right now because there's a new regime at the helm, but definitely during my era there, I've seen that roller coaster of not having a user experience that you were willing to speak on, rather than building an infrastructure that worked so well that I'll definitely tell you all a story afterwards about New Year's was probably one of our biggest, endeavors or efforts or spike in capacity. All of the tests, quality tests, red line testing that we've done prior, we've automated it and brought that into light so that the infrastructure can be at that higher level. So if I have an opinion about it, I've lived through it and seen an environment where we didn't do things the right way. And definitely afterwards, we cleaned it up, definitely bringing data, metrics, and user experience, which is my main focus as a site reliability engineer. You can really start to understand and embrace this idea that, hey, putting that on the burden as to a software engineer is not the right medium for you to get and maintain users, because these applications, it could be one crash and they're done. So I definitely can resonate with it.
Yeah, totally. Marcus, what do you think?
It's funny. I heard a joke a long time ago after Agile came out. So Agile and extreme programming and pair programming, all that stuff came out in the early 2000s. And it was this whole new method. And so the joke is one manager says to the other, so are you all doing Agile? Yeah. Are you doing pair programming? Well, I mean, no, not all the time. No, I mean, not really. No, only when we have to learn something or debug something. We're not really doing pair programming. Well, are you keeping up with your Scrum meetings every single day? No, not really doing that either. It gets really tiresome, do all that stuff. Like, well, what are you doing? It's Agile. It's like, well, we don't write documentation anymore. And to me, shift left is opening that conversation to, you do DevOps? Well, yeah, we do DevOps. Well, are you maintaining a shippable code every iteration? Like, no. Is your infrastructure always running as code? Yeah, not really, no. Well, what are you doing as DevOps? Well, we're not testing. And that to me is kind of what is emerging from all this, is that we're foisting this fiction that developers will start doing testing. We're not clearing that with the developers when we actually make that decree, and then we don't actually verify that they did it. We're just sort of pretending that it happened. That's what I'm seeing. And as a result, every person listening to this has probably been pissed off about some software application in the last 48 hours, and that's only getting worse.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I agree with you, Jason. I think it never really got off the landing pad.
Yeah. Especially, hold on, I got even more numbers for you. 75% of the developers that we surveyed admitted to bypassing security measures such as MFA or using unstable VPNs to complete tasks, with 39% of them doing that routinely.
What about like sharing passwords and stuff?
Yeah, that's just opening the door up. I mean, as an engineer like myself that has worked very closely with security and just giving them insights into how, as an engineer from a systems engineer aspect, what I could do, that right there just sounds off the wall, because the vulnerability that it's opening up, I don't think it's warranted in terms of how easy they're just trying to get to where they're trying to go. And that's what it really is. It's like, hey, just trying to move quick. I'm trying to move fast. Let me just do this. But it's like, hey, that one little gap right there, if somebody like me that has, this experience, it's just a wide open door. And sometimes it just comes down to, sometimes they never felt that fire before. And that's probably what it could be. But definitely every time I hear that, it just, site reliability, radar just starts to go crazy.
Yeah. Tell us a bit more about, your experience at Twitter, and how did that shape your approach to site reliability engineering?
Yeah, so at Twitter, I worked on a few different teams. The one team that I worked on before I departed was the compute platform team, where we really basically abstracted hardware. We gave application administrator or developers an interface to schedule workload, and definitely once they schedule it, we took it from there. One of the cool things about developing an infrastructure as such is that you're able to take a lot of those burdens that you all were mentioned earlier, and we forcibly require you to maintain a certain level before your application can be deployed, such as utilizing, a workflow tool that we build internal that requires you to have successful unit tests, that requires you to work and operate in a more centralized repository that everybody's contributing to. Security was able to, scan your binaries before we even actually deploy them to make sure that you're running the latest versions or no vulnerabilities were there. But one of the cooler things around that is that it really just abstracted so much of those burdens that we're talking about today, and just forcibly required the engineers to maintain a certain level of requirement before applications can be pushed to production. Prior to that, working on the compute team, I worked really heavily in the data center side of the house. So I worked on a team called Fleet Management, We basically managed all the hardware that came in and out of the data center. And we really just automated all of that from when a server or rack of servers got onto the floor, they plugged it in, you walked away, and our OKRs or SLOs and SLIs were really around how many times somebody had to come back to that rack. And more or less, we didn't even touch it until it was decommissioned 5 or 6 years later. So it just really requires some level of development, engineering, and definitely understanding hardware and the operating system at a really low level so that we could really just introduce this abstracted environment from any of our customers above us all the way up to application developers. So testing is by far one of our main tools to ensure that we were able to provide those type of services, because we built a service specifically in that fleet management team that basically tested the infrastructure all day and every day, from rebuilding machines, monitoring metrics, ensuring that we are maintaining certain level of security, deploying applications, testing out ports. Like, we built so many, test automation that sometimes I didn't even really know that I was doing all of this QA stuff just to, maintain reliability of what we were building in terms of that infrastructure. But this fully automated test infrastructure really just changed the game for us, because we went from having so many failures from deploying that eventually impacted customers' accessibility to our infrastructure to fully automating that. And then it just became, norm. And then it's like, hey, we're watching metrics and being alerted when things broke rather than seeing when everything was working successfully. So those are just a little bit of some of the stuff that I worked on, and definitely leaning on the concept of ensuring that you test your code before you deploy, ensuring that you're testing your infrastructure as things are sitting out there for, months or years without someone physically visiting them.
So is the answer to my article basically the SRE function?
When you were talking about it earlier, I'm like, man, that sounds like an SRE, boy, right? Because truly the value around SREs, and this is the thing that I think our industry has really, unfortunately, kind of merged DevOps, SRE together and not really just understand the value. And I mentioned it earlier, like, I'm a diplomat for the customer. I don't care what you're building. I don't care about the new feature. I would care about the reliability and how my customers, being the users of our platform, are able to access whatever it is. And as long as we maintain this SLO or this indicator right here, and we don't breach it, then go ahead and do what you want to do. But as soon as we break it, right, it's like, hey, these are the things we have to check off before we can open up that floodgate again. And it just definitely is like, mindset-wise, SREs come with a lot of backgrounds around systems engineering, but also software engineering. We had a very great QA team that basically did redline testing, like anything that was going to be deployed, especially before New Year's. I was going to talk about New Year's. We would be doing redline testing at least, weeks prior to make sure everybody's maintaining a certain level of reliability, especially during that time. And we got so good at this. And this is why I feel like testing and building out these frameworks or infrastructure is really important, is that SREs were usually the first ones online before, New Year's in Japan. There was one year that there was no SREs online, and it was just our TCC command center that was monitoring it. And because we did so much efficient work before, we didn't have to worry about it. And we were able to, support the load because we did that rigor testing prior. So I always appreciate an environment where I don't have to be woken up at night, pager duty, and be, stressed out, especially if we put enough effort in it prior. And definitely something that we can chop up, talk a little bit more about if we want to.
Sleep. Sleep is so important. If you could take one thing away from this episode, it's sleep.
Yeah, for sure. I actually have a mantra that I used to tell my mentees. I was like, I don't want to be woken up at night because of capacity, right? If you wake me up because of capacity, just let it go down, because that means you did not do enough redline testing, right? And plain and simple, right? That's more or less the mindset that we want to make sure we instill in organizations so that we know that systems are going to be reliable when they need to be.
I was curious. I had to look it up. How many organizations have actually implemented an SRE function? Because if it's, based on what you're saying and where we were at with Shift Left in my presentation of it, I feel like it's mandatory, right? You absolutely, if you're going to have this digital transformation, it is not complete without the SRE function. I already knew that, but then like you put the exclamation point, I feel like, on that. And I looked it up, and in a March 2024 survey, this is really the only data I could find. In a March 2024 survey, 62% of organizations have established a site reliability engineering function. But the issue with that 62% is it varies on the maturity level of that SRE function. And it's over half have adopted SRE principles with specific teams, products, or services. 23% are piloting it, and 19% scaled SRE across the entire organization. So it's an inflated number for a number that's actually much lower in reality, which is surprising, especially as we're talking about it. It's like, sounds like if you're going to do one, you can't have the other. Like, it's the right hand to it, you know?
Correct. Yeah, for sure.
Marcus, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
The only thing I'm wondering is if it's too late to try to bring people up. This is more of a testing audience, I think, and I don't know if they all know what SLOs and SLIs are. You want to give a 60-second overview now that it's probably too late around sort of the KPIs of and acronyms of the SRE function?
Yeah. So you usually start off with a service level indicator. So those are like data points, and at the lowest part, right? Indicators are like success rates for, let's say, the amount of hits that you have to a site, and based on, success being 200 versus failure is anything, 400, 500, whatever, right? And then you're more or less tracking that indicator as a beginning point of defining if your service is reliable or not. Now you're going to put that out into a range of like, how many times did I break a defined line of when I was running my service at an aggregate view? So it's like, hey, within this time frame here, my service level objective is that I would not breach this indicator or this line a certain amount of time. That becomes your service level objective. Now, you usually view these and, draw it out to a quarterly base, but that really just tells you, based on the work that we've done for this quarter, how many times did we breach that service level objective? Now, the service level agreement is that one step above. It's like, hey, what are my customers expecting in terms of the service that we're offering? My customers are expecting, hey, we should be, servicing 99.99 times of the time that we're not going to be broken or breach this indicator. And then as soon as we breach our objectives and we are affecting our service level agreement, that's where you start raising the flag and like, hey, we need to stop what we're doing because there is something going on and it's really going to affect our customers' impact. That's what the SREs really have in terms of like data point and validation to really, have the power. And this is probably the reason why sometimes it's difficult to introduce SRE practices in organizations, because SREs should have the power to tell developers, even DevOps, that we need to slow down or we need to step back a little bit, or we need to increase testing, redlining, and things like that. And sometimes organizations don't want to, empower them to do that. And that's why they're not able to get to that point. But organizations like Twitter and, these really, hyperscale infrastructure really honors that level of like mindfulness that SREs are, observing metrics at that level, that when we throw a red flag or we wave it, it's like, hey, they're definitely catching something. And our users are unfortunately having this unexpected behavior. And those are the metric points that we use, the SLIs, SLAs, or SLOs, and then SLAs above that.
It makes sense. And so then what happens is above the SLO, you're in danger of kind of violating a customer-based performance metric. And that counts against then what you call, I guess, the error budget, which then says we cannot exceed the error budget. Therefore, you cannot push any more software or it might break things in production. I think it's a really great and mature way of thinking about it. And I just, I hope it's as widespread as I want to believe it is, because it seems great. It's hard for me to sit in my company and imagine that we would let products stop shipping features for anything.
And that's the thing right there, right? Imagine you want to introduce the SRE practices and then SRE say, hey, we need to pause. They see that's that wall. And it really does come down to just, and I'm going to, shift to just a little bit in terms of how organizations can really make this impact, is organizational structure, where it is the SRE organizational hierarchy sit in that tree of impact or influence, right? If an SRE organization sits a little bit too low inside of the organization, then they don't really have that. But you'll see companies like Google have the head of SRE sitting at the same table, right under the CTO, being able to make that level of impact and making those decisions. So it does require that type of level of agreements from everybody to really support this idea.
Awesome. I feel like this is a good point in the podcast, because My gosh, I feel like we could talk about this topic forever, but I wanted to touch on the other aspect of what you did at Twitter and make sure that we give it some airtime. You made a huge impact on the tech and diversity and inclusion initiatives at Twitter. Talk to us a little bit about that and what inspired you to do it. And yeah, just walk us through that.
Yeah, this is something that's really dear to me, especially during my time at Twitter. So let's take it back to 2013. I, got the opportunity to, go to San Francisco, move out there, and just really jump into this new high level of engineering. I will say, unfortunately, during that time, if I were to look around how many other engineers look like me, I could only count it on my hand. And that's something that really just made me feel like there's definitely room and opportunities to make an impact, because it wasn't the lack of skill that I was sitting at the table with, PhDs and, really making high level decisions. It was just unaware of that type of environment that I was exposed to, and definitely had an opportunity to speak up. So in about 2015, I was part of the group that really reignited an ERG group, an employee resource group at Twitter called Blackbirds. Now, this group definitely wasn't only focused on engineering, but it's focused on the whole Twitter as a whole organization. But myself and those few other Black engineers, which I would say about 3-4 of us, really just understood that we could increase the amount of representation if we were to help them be mindful of opportunities for us to recruit in other avenues, rather than just the Ivy Leagues down the street being Berkeley and Stanford, and then any other schools around the country. And nothing about those, anything bad about those schools. It's just that the opportunity for us to increase diversity, they already had those same challenges in their school, right? So one of the cool things about, being a leader in the tech, or specifically an engineering organization, is that I started to attend conferences and speak at colleges and universities, at HBCUs, and attend conferences like the National Society for Black Engineers. And when we went there with a recruiting force really focused on ensuring that we find candidates that had the level of engineering that we were looking for, but also being able to provide them an opportunity to interview, right? And with, those type of endeavors, we were definitely able to increase from, internships to actual, new grad first time opportunities tenfold. By the time I left in 2020, when I left, I couldn't even count how many Black engineers we had in the organization, because we were able to make that impact. And not even just on the IC side of the house, but also on the management side of the house, because there weren't that many Black engineering managers. And I didn't want to go and be a manager because I enjoy the keyboard too much. And I definitely have always felt like, I didn't want to be a micromanager, and I always wanted to, work towards principal, distinguished engineering. But I could still, help organizations be mindful of the influence that we have as ICs if we don't see managers that look like us on that other side of the table. So working, with partners in the recruiting side of the house, even, speaking to as high as Jack Dorsey, talking to him about what the value of diversity is at Twitter, that he's even attended those conferences that I mentioned, like NSBE, and, presented the idea that Twitter is, looking to make those type of impacts. And I can tell you, like, it's something that I've been so honored to see, experience, and definitely know that the skill sets are there. The opportunity just needs to be presented. In terms of background rise, I don't even have college degree. I did certifications and really, took the scenic route, I tell everybody, in terms of developing. But even with that, I had the capacity in terms of experience to develop, to work at a company like Twitter and become a leader. Why aren't we giving at least an opportunity to open door to candidates that look like me? And that's one of those endeavors that I really, really do appreciate you giving me space to talk about, but definitely just want the industry to know that it can change people's lives and also change the organization's development. Because I would say that even me as a Black engineer, as soon as I started working in an organization where that didn't become something to hold me back, I flourished even more, right? If I'm working in an environment where I don't have to question that, and I'm like, oh man, I can really just be myself, or I can have my albums on the wall, I can just chill and, just have that normal BobbyD vibe. Oh my gosh, I don't know what I would create. And that's the cool thing, is I created some really cool tools and software. I'm working at Twitter, and it's because I was in an environment that just allowed me to be myself.
That's awesome. Where do you think the industry's at today? You gave us a good picture of 2013. You kind of walked us through what Twitter's done. Where do you think we stand as an industry? We talk a lot on this show about the ratio of men to women right? And especially because we deal a lot with the open source community. It's even worse in open source. What do you think it's like now?
I think it's a roller coaster. And then this is just like the roller coaster in our industry is we have, these really high highs and now we unfortunately get layoffs and things like that. And unfortunately, diversity inclusion during those times, companies usually cut, right? They cut in terms of budget wise, they cut endeavors, focus. And unfortunately, being a capitalist country, the shareholders are your most important people, right? It's like, hey, we got to keep the numbers going. But I will say that because we experienced it, there's no doubt that we can't ensure that this is something that we consistently do. Over time, those leaders that have been able to step up, including like myself, from coming up in that era and then eventually being, promoted up to directors, VPs, and eventually CEOs, will continue to embrace that mindset because we know how effective it was. In terms of the era we're at right now, I think we are getting a little bit of receding, those type of situations because I do see, especially with a nonprofit that I do a lot of work with is codepath.org. A lot of their students are underrepresented students, either, from different backgrounds or being women of engineering, that they're still unfortunately unable to get opportunities, right? Where the market where it's like everybody's looking for work. And now it's like, hey, if I'm a newer engineer, junior engineer, and I have diversity checkbox also, you're definitely still going to be, in a pot with candidates that might get an upper hand because of other reasons. So in my opinion, I'm very optimistic about everything. It's just that this era that we're going through, we're just going to be on the dip and then it's going to come back up and eventually it'll be something as a norm. Because I love working for people that, represent the customers that we're servicing or the ideas that are being presented. Diverse perspective is probably one of the most valuable things I experienced working at Twitter, where because I didn't go to those Ivy Leagues and get a PhD, I brought a different way of thinking, right? You talked about, different VPN stuff. Like I came from the era where I had built my own VPN in-house and I was like, yo, what in the world did I just do? Like that experience gave me a diverse perspective. So that's why I view things different. And that different view is what's really going to give your company an opportunity to get an upper hand against your competition. So definitely looking forward to that roller coaster on the incline. But right now I feel like we're definitely not at the bottom, but we're heading towards it, in my opinion.
I was lucky enough to go to the Diversity Day at All Things Open last year. It was my first time attending. I think it was their second time that they've done it. And my God, everybody needs to go to that. It was so good, so eye-opening. And that's where I learned you put the B before the D, BDEI. And it's all about belonging. Right. And creating a culture of belonging. And what you just said, being able to put the albums on the wall, be yourself, and then imagine the creativity and what can come from that when someone feels like they're accepted and they're part of it. And they talked a lot about change comes from the top. And the more your leadership is diverse, it's amazing how that trickles down. And that's where it's got to happen.
I feel like this has gotten me angry a lot around how years ago when I was involved in this similar ERG at a previous company, I got told the same thing by hiring managers. They said that there's a problem. We just can't get candidates in the pipeline. And I'm just like, sell that excuse somewhere else. That has never been true. You're not looking hard enough. And not only that, it is 100% legal to invest 100% of your recruiting dollars at HBCUs and other places like this to put all that effort there, because the non-diverse candidates, the white guys, they'll find you. You never have a problem locating those folks. They will always be there. You can put so much more time and energy and effort into this, and you are in control of your own pipeline. And I think people just don't hear that very often, or they don't believe it.
Yeah, totally. And it's definitely something that when you hear, and we had some unfortunate higher ups at Twitter that had the saying, hey, at the bar type thing. And I'm like, in my mind, like, you actually don't know where I set the bar at, right? It's like, if I set the bar there, then where are you at? And then you're saying that they're not at this bar. It's like the access, the opportunity. And for my community, all they need to do is just see it, right? Is see somebody like me talking about working at Twitter, the type of tech that we'll talk about. I mean, we're talking about hyperscale, SREs, SLOs, like, as soon as they hear that, it's like, oh, we can do, yeah, of course you can. And that's all it is. And as soon as that opportunity presents, then that's what opens up the growth that they're looking for. If they don't know that they can, we're not really giving them the space to develop, then obviously nobody will flourish. So I'm always looking forward to, just spending, a few minutes talking about this topic, but definitely appreciate because it will continue to make the impact that I know the world needs to see.
Yeah, absolutely. Tell us more about the Tech Hustle community, what you're doing today, what you're up to.
So the Tech Hustle community really is like, well, let me take 2 steps back. While I was working at Twitter, I came to, really like a peak in my career in terms of what I was working on, the things I was interested in, the impact in terms of infrastructure that I was able to manage, and things that I really pursue as my personal legend in terms of just the things that I want to do in my life. And I got to a point where the idea of what we built at Twitter is just something that was missing in the industry as a whole, and really just building up a community that really focuses on not just people getting into tech, really focus on people that are in tech or already at the keyboard. Because one of the voids that I had developing is I didn't have peers, I didn't have mentors that looked like me that really could understand my struggle and really just be able to say, hey, these are the moves you need to make from, working on impactful work to as a developer, make sure you learn about unit tests so your code doesn't break when you, push it to production, or, building brag docs, having, scrum meetings and the value behind them, meeting with your manager and things like that, is developing a community that really provides that service for those that are in the industry and needs that peer group or partnership in their development. We're really just focusing on, impacting our community directly we also do a podcast, the Tech Hustle podcast. We do a newsletter, and we travel the country speaking in conferences and universities, just ensuring that we, convey this message directly to our community and also give them examples. And we do career development and things like that. But we're just really focused on, for the next 2 or 3 years, just building a community. And that's where we're at.
Awesome. Well, obviously that's something passionate to my DevRel heart community. So I 100%, appreciate that and see what you're doing. And it's awesome. And thank you so much for what you do for the industry and the impact you've had and seeing you talk. And thank you so much for joining us today, BobbyD.
Thank you so much. I appreciate y'all. Have a good one.
Awesome. Thank you. And thank you for giving us the time that you have. It is valuable. We really appreciate it. We don't take it for granted. Hope you had a good time, as good a time as we had, but I always say you didn't. That's okay.
No, this was awesome.
You can wish you had as much fun at home, but we will see you next time on Test Case Scenario. Thanks a lot. Thank you for joining us on Test Case Scenario. Share your thoughts in the comments. We'll make sure to respond to each and every single one. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell to keep in touch. If you missed our last episode, it's popping up on your screen right now. Go, click it. Until next time on Test Case Scenario.